afternoon, everybody. My name is Aaron Staebell. I'm the manager for educational resources with Hal Leonard, and I am joined here for one of our great webinars with composer Robert Buckley. And we're here to talk about some of his work, and I think that you're going to learn a lot. I'm going to learn a lot, and we're going to have a great time learning about this piece. So without further ado, I want to introduce to you one of our great Hal Leonard composers. This is Robert Buckley. Robert, how are you tonight?
I'm good. I'm great.
Great. Happy
Thank
that you're
you.
here. Thanks for making some time to chat about this. So, before we get into the specifics of our session, we were just talking a little bit offline about your background and how unique it is, which is really something that we love to highlight and just kind of humanize the folks that are writing this music a little bit and let everybody know that they're regular folks just like everybody else. So, can you tell us a little bit about kind of what your life was like before you started writing music for bands and for other groups like that? What's your history like a little bit?
Well, I went to high school so I live in Vancouver, British Columbia, which is on the west coast of Canada. I went to school here, and like a lot of people, I played in the high school band. I also played in a community youth band. And I actually did write a couple of pieces in high school for that band. Um, but my dream was, and right after high school, I started up a rock and roll band, and we had a few hit records and toured around and all that. But my dream was always to combine rock music with symphonic music. So early on, when I was, I don't know, in my early 20s, I wrote a piece. It was about an hour and a half long for symphony orchestra and rock and roll band, and we performed it in a few places. And my dream was to take it on the road, but it turned out to be way too expensive. So I spent quite a few years of my life playing in rock and roll bands and touring around and doing all that. But while I was doing that, I was also doing a lot of television work, scoring TV shows, some movies, and eventually that took over, and I scored a bunch of television series and some movies and things like that. And then I went to live in Holland for a while, and I started playing in a wind ensemble over there. And they said, you know, you're a composer. Why don't you write something for us? So I wrote some pieces for that ensemble. They were amazing ensemble. They just celebrated their 175th birthday.
Wow.
Amazing ensemble in Holland. Um, and so I wrote some pieces for them, and their librarian said, "Oh, these are great. You should get them published." So we sent them off to De Hask Publishing in Holland, and they accepted the pieces and published them. And then De Hask got taken over by Hal Leonard, and by that time I was living back in Vancouver. And Hal Leonard said, "Well, you know, you live in North America now, so why don't we publish you directly?" So I sort of got into Hal Leonard through the back door in a way. And I think now I've got almost 100 pieces in publication with Hal Leonard at all different grade levels, including string orchestra pieces as well.
Wow. Do you remember the first one? Or you probably remember the first one with the Hosk, right? What were
The
those?
first
Do you
one with
remember?
De Hask, I think, was called Cathedral Grove, which
Okay.
Hal Leonard now publishes,
Got it.
which is a piece I wrote originally for the Commonwealth Games, the opening ceremony of the Commonwealth Games. So that piece has sort of a long life to it, but it
Yeah.
turned out that it worked really well as a band piece, and it's done well. It's done well in terms of
Yeah.
Cathedral Grove is a forest on Vancouver Island that has a lot of first growth trees. So it's an amazing place to hang out. The
Wow.
cathedral part is the trees.
Right. Yeah. Natural Cathedral. That sounds great. And you mentioned some movies and some TV. Anything that we would be familiar with,
I
or is
don't
it
know
all?
because that was a while ago now. The television series that's probably the best known is a series called Reboot, which was the first all CGI television series of all time.
Oh wow.
And I did that series for, I think we did 5 seasons of that series. And I did a band version of that, which is published by Hal Leonard as well.
Hmm. That's great. What an
Oh, also I did
interesting
the
background.
Transformers series as well, which
Oh,
may be even a better known.
oh, absolutely. At least
Yeah.
with my generation, that's huge. Transformers, yeah. Well, that's great. I grew up listening to your music and didn't even know it. Here
Yeah,
we are.
exactly.
That's fantastic. Well, the motivation for this particular webinar is to try to focus on your piece "Journey" or "Paddle Song," right? And you have some really interesting backstory to that piece, a really interesting connection with Chief Ian Campbell. Maybe you could just spend a couple minutes taking us through kind of the genesis of the piece, and how that relationship helped kind of inform your work, and any other things that might be interesting for us to know about that collaboration, because it certainly is a unique one.
Yeah, we have to go back a few years. There is a group in Vancouver called the West Vancouver Youth Band. They have been in existence now for almost 100 years. I think they were started in 1928. They are the longest running youth band, I think, in Canada. Um, and they are on their rehearsal space is on the traditional Squamish land here in Vancouver. The Squamish Nation reaches all through British Columbia and down into Washington State. It's a huge, huge piece of land. Um, so the band room was on the Squamish First Nation, and there are several members of the Squamish band that went through the band, the West Vancouver Youth Band, and so there's been sort of a relationship there that was started a long time ago. And then the present conductor of the band thought it would be wonderful to, he became good friends with one of the elders named Bob Baker, who's a composer, leads the Eagle Song Singers and Dancers. He thought it would be a really good idea to do a collaboration. So he put me together with Bob Baker, and Bob Baker had written a piece called "The Gathering of Eagles," and it's the Squamish First Nation. Their music is pretty well all vocalizations and drums. There's no instruments. There's no harmony. It's a single pentatonic melody with a drum beat, um, which for a composer is great because it leaves it open to lots of different ways of treating it harmonically, interpreting it, and all that. So Bob Baker. So in the Squamish tradition, and it may be true of all the native bands across Canada, in the Squamish tradition, there are no composers of the music. Bob Baker talks about receiving the melody. So he was actually in a shopping mall when he received this melody, and he went back and sang it for a bunch of his other band members, and they said, "Well, we think it's original. We think this is
Wow.
yours. You came up with this." So he he gave me permission to be able to adapt it for Wind Band, actually with his blessing and with the blessing of the elders in the Squamish First Nation. So, by the way, when I say First Nation, that's the way we refer to Native people in Canada. There are over 300 First Nations in Canada. They all have their own languages, customs, and their own music. So there's quite a diversity of. But the group that I've been working with is the Squamish Nation. So Bob Baker and I collaborated on Gathering of Eagles. It was premiered at the Whistler Festival with him, and it's published by Hal Leonard. It became very popular. And then we did another one with Bob Baker, and then we did another one with Bob Baker. And then Chief Ian Campbell contacted me, who's Bob Baker's cousin. And Chief Ian Campbell is the chief of the Squamish Nation. He's chief of a lot of people. And he said, "I've got this piece that came to me, and I think it would work well for Wind Band." So I met him and we had lunch together. We went out to the parking lot of the restaurant, and I put my phone up, and he started clapping his hands and singing this song. And it is a really cool melody, and I knew that I could do something with it. And the neat thing about it is that it's in 6/8. Most of the Squamish music is just in basically in duplets rather than triplets. So it was different than the other pieces. Also, a really catchy melody, I thought. So I went away, and he told me in all the pieces that I've done with the First Nations, I've spent a lot of time with them, listening to the stories, listening to the legends. knowing what the songs mean to them. In the Squamish language, the word for music and medicine is the same word. So for them, their music going out into the world is an act of healing. So it's very special to them, and so I did took a lot of care and put a lot of time into adapting the music so that it would reflect their intention with the music and also be something that would be engaging for wind bands. There are pieces at all levels. There's a couple of level one, there's a couple of level two pieces, there's a couple of level three pieces. So the music is and for string orchestra as well. So they're available at all levels.
Well,
Journey, I believe, yeah, it's a Journey is a two and a half.
yeah, so that was actually the next question I had for you, is that when you've done several of these, and so when you start with the source material, how does your decision making process lead you to writing a level 2.5, for example? Is that something that you set out to do as your initial goal, or is that something that's just sort of like, hey, I think I've written this great piece, it seems like it's about a level 2.5? Or how's your process in terms of leveling, because that's important for our teachers?
Yeah, when I did Gathering of Eagles, that's a level three piece, and I wanted to. I did two versions of it. They use the same melody, but they're quite different in their use of the melody. So I did two versions: a grade three version and a grade one version of that piece. I think it was grade one, um, and to make it available. So the reason Journey is grade two partially is because it fits in that range really nicely. Um, it couldn't be a grade one and be a 6/8 piece because I don't think that fits with the parameters. The main thing was that we were premiering it at the Whistler Music Festival. So the third day of the Whistler Music Festival, they get about 2,000 kids up there, band members. And the third day of the music festival, we have this mass band, huge mass band of almost 2,000 players in the convention center there. This piece was going to be played. So we had kids from, grade seven all the way up to high school. So we needed to have a piece of music that could be played by all of them. So that was part of the choice of it being a grade two piece because we knew that it would be doable because there's no rehearsal ahead of time. They walk into the convention center, they all are sight reading, and we got about half an hour to get it together and film it. So it was that was partially the thing, was to create a piece of music that could be read easily.
Yeah, that's great. And so when you listen to I don't know if you still have that original recording that the chief made into your phone, but when you listen to that, or if we listen to that, um, pretty recognizable compared to the final product, or did you have to make a lot of
Absolutely.
changes?
Absolutely, completely recognizable. Now, Journey does have a key change in it to keep it interesting, but it starts off in the same key that he sang it to me in the parking lot. And strangely enough, all of the other pieces I put in the keys that they sang them to me, because when we did the initial performances, we did them at the Longhouse at the Squamish First Nation, and the performances started off with them singing the song and then segueing into the wind version. And believe it or not, every time they sang it in the same key, even though
Wow,
there was no tonal reference for their
huh,
vocals. I mean, they
that
hear it.
tells you
They
something,
hear it
right?
in that key. So
Yeah.
this piece is in the key that he sang it. So it is very recognizable. I make sure in these pieces that the initial statement of the theme is very, very close to the way they performed it, if not
Mhm.
exactly the same. And then I take it, basically do a theme and variations,
Oh,
and
okay.
take it through different moods and different harmonic settings and things like that. So it starts off very, very traditionally, usually with a single wind line and a drum, and then gradually develops into music that's a bit more harmonically adventuresome.
Right. That's great. So you worked on it for, I don't know how long, an extended period of time, I'm sure. And then what happened when you took it back to Chief Ian Campbell and said, "Here's what I've done"? Or did he have notes for you, or did he accept it kind of as is, or what was that collaboration like?
The I talked to him a lot as I was writing the piece, and I would bounce ideas off him. I would play back the bits that I'd been working on and make sure that I was on the right track. So there were no surprises. The first time he heard the piece was in the band room of the West Vancouver Youth Band with them playing it for him. So they had already rehearsed it a little bit so that they could play it for him. And the way we've done it is that he came in, he sang his version of it, talked a little bit about the piece, and then they played the wind version back to him again. Now, there's definitely space in there for him to make comments and him to say, you know, that doesn't work or does work or whatever. But he loved it. He actually had tears in his eyes. And
Wow.
when we were up in Whistler, and there were a lot of the elders of the Squamish First Nation came up for the mass band performance. They all had tears in their eyes. They're very moved that non-native people want to perform their music, and they're also very moved that that music is going out into the world, and for them, it's sending healing out into the world.
Yeah, what a great message. That's beautiful. If you were talking to a teacher that was gonna then perform this piece with their students, some of the pieces that we play, whether they're Highliner publications or others, there's not a whole lot of history or cultural significance behind all of them necessarily. Sometimes it's just a great piece, right? So if
Mhm.
someone were to program this piece, what kind of advice would you give a band director as far as making sure that the students understood the cultural significance, or like what kind of things, whether it's about the Squamish people or whether it's about the folks that you've worked with, kind of things that people need to know, or maybe not need to know, but that you'd like people to know when they perform this piece or when they use it as a teaching tool.
Right. Well, first of all, this is the score. Um, there are a lot of program notes. So there's a lot of information there that talks about the piece and where it came from, and talks about the Squamish First Nation. The other thing is there are links there to the Squamish First Nation, to their website, to the Eagle Song singers and dancers. So if a teacher wanted to, they could go on their website and learn a lot about that particular First Nation anyway. Um, the other thing that's important for people to know is that it was used with permission, and with the blessing of the elders of the nation, and that I think that's very important. I'm hoping that there will be, like I said, there's well over 300 First Nations across Canada. That there will be other collaborations, either with native composers, which will be absolutely wonderful, or collaborations with other wind composers, and that they get to have the same journey that I've had with working with them. It is very, very important, I think, that this music is used with permission, with blessing, and that it's used with what's the word, respect
Right,
of the music
respect.
and the culture. So I think it's important that for teachers to know that in these particular cases, that's there. These pieces were not absconded or taken or used.
Hmm.
They are the real thing in terms of being used with permission.
Yeah, authentic. And
Yeah,
if I remember correctly, I'm not looking at the score, but you use a word. It doesn't say arranged by. It says what?
it
Adapted or
reimagined. Yeah,
reimagined.
it's
Right.
interesting. Like I say, I mean, I only know about the native band that's here in British Columbia. I don't know about other native bands, so I can only talk. And I would rather that Ian Campbell could have been here to talk himself, but he's off somewhere in the bush. Um, but so I will try the best I can to speak to it. But um, don't they don't use the word compose. They use the word receive. That they receive the music. When they receive, like in this particular case, when Chief Campbell received this melody, he checked with the other members of the nation to see if it actually was an original melody or maybe was something from the past. And when everybody said, "Yeah, no, that's sounds we haven't heard that before," then he becomes the keeper of the melody. He isn't the composer. It doesn't belong to him in their culture. He becomes the keeper. I made sure that when we published it, that he got credit as the composer. He gets the royalties as a composer. Um, so, I mean, in our system, we compose things. In their system, they don't. But I wanted to make sure that he got the royalties and everything like that. So he's credited as the composer. And I didn't want to use the word arrange so much because there are melodies that are in there that are melodies that aren't his melodies. In other words, I extended things and changed things a little bit to keep the interest up. So I use the word reimagine, um, but he is the composer. I mean, the piece wouldn't exist if it wasn't for him.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I was thinking about that. I was thinking, I wonder if he gets credit in any royalty kind of situation. You
Yeah,
answered that
for
question, so
sure.
that's good. It's
And
good
if you
to
look
know.
on the score, you can see that his name is at the top of the score.
Right.
There we go. Where is it? I don't know if you can
Yeah, you
see
can see it.
that.
That's it.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, he's the guy.
I love that. Um, so something that at least in the U.S., I'm not sure about other places, but something that teachers are starting to do more and more now is cross collaboration with other departments. So maybe like a history, social studies kind of department. Um, do you have anything that you might be able to offer in terms of is that like if there's a story that goes with this piece, or something that if folks did want to sort of team up with another teacher of a different discipline to look at this piece, or maybe a larger set of music. I'm not really certain what kind of answer I'm hoping you to give here, but just if you thought, if you were in that situation, maybe that's the best way to think of it. If you were the band director going to play this piece,
Yeah.
and you were going to try to reach out to a colleague that taught something else, what might be interesting or useful to be able to do that with
Gee,
this piece?
I think there's all sorts of things. This song, Journey, is the song. It's a paddle song. So I mean, there's probably lots of history in the United States of paddling. Like the use of canoes and things like that to travel and to visit the different bands. Um, so I mean, historically, there's probably some interesting stories that are there. Um, Also, I think the art department could be used. Creating drawings or paintings or sketches or something like that. I think it's just open to the imagination. Now, the other thing, all of these pieces um, would be best served with an actual native drum. Um, we had the Squamish First Nation made three drums for the West Vancouver Youth Band, and it really does make a difference to the sound of the piece. So, if there's a way of either getting hold of a drum or making one, I mean, it's basically just a hoop with deerskin or skin stretched over the top, and a beater, which is a piece of wood with deerskin stretched over the end of it. It has quite a specific sound. It's quite actually low in pitch, but it really does do a neat thing. I mean, if you don't have that, obviously you can use a tom tom or you can use a frame drum of some kind. I mean, there's lots of things around. But if you do have a band near you, sometimes you can purchase those things directly from the band, and they have people that make those. Probably would be a nice thing to use in the piece if you can get hold of one.
Yeah. Do you think that if you live somewhere that's not near the Squamish Nation, right? Like I'm here on the East Coast.
Yeah,
Um, is that still an appropriate thing to go to any First Nation folks that are near me and say, hey, this is what I'm working on? Or is that like not something that you would want to mix?
I don't know. I really don't know. Um, I I I mean, all you can do is ask.
Sure.
I think there are maybe some bands that would be fine with it, and others that might not be. Um, all of the nations are different. Like I said, they have different languages, different
Right.
cultures. I know I get emails all the time from people that have purchased my music asking me questions, and I always respond. And I've had quite a few emails, definitely from within Canada, because it's in our mandate in the school system to teach Native history, um, and not the Native history that was around 50 years ago, but the Native history that's around now, which is quite
Right.
different.
Yep.
And I think that's starting to happen in the United States as well. So I get emails. I got an email from a school that half the school is on a reservation and half the school isn't.
Wow.
So they have a lot of kids there that are reservation kids, and they were wondering about appropriation and wondering whether it was used with permission and all that. So,
Yeah.
I mean, that seems to be the biggest concern. And I think if you approached a native band to see if you could get a drum or see if you could get some input or something like that, or have somebody from that band come and talk and this is what you're doing, I think it's just a question.
Right.
And they'll either say yes or no, you know.
Right. If you mean well,
Yeah,
hopefully no harm
yeah,
done, right?
yeah,
Yeah. And is it the type of thing maybe even you could have someone come and perform that drum part with your group, right? I mean, that
yeah.
seems reasonable. Yeah, I like that idea too. It's very cool. Um, so when you were working on this piece, you're trying to stay true to the original content, of course, and you're trying to be respectful, and you're trying to write a level 2.5, which maybe not the easiest always. Did you face any challenges as you were working on this? I mean, I'm sure every piece has challenges, but anything specific or unique that you kind of struggled with that you remember?
Um, you know, the most difficult thing, I just let me look at the score. I believe this is sort of an 8 bar. Yeah. So in 4/4, which it's in 4/4, but it's triplets. It's basically an 8 bar melody. It's an 8 bar pentatonic melody. So and the piece lasts for about 3.5 minutes or something like that. So always the thing is, what do you do? I mean, after you've stated the melody, what's next? How do you keep it interesting? But that's when I go back to talking to Ian Campbell and talking to him about what they see when they go out on their paddle treks, which can take months up the coast here, and they visit a lot of the islands that are off the coast of British Columbia that are up actually close to Alaska. They go a long way in these boats. So it's like, what do they see, and what might they? And the eagle is very very high in their culture, right? I think it's probably the most important animal in their culture. In their tradition, the eagle is the connection between man and the spirit, right? And so the eagle goes back and forth between man and God, or whatever that's called, um, and brings messages back and forth. So I I was imagining, as he was talking to me, I was imagining what would it be like being an eagle, flying high up in the sky because they go way up there, and I'm watching the paddlers go along the coast and take this trek. That sort of was what I was imagining, was being looking through the eyes of an eagle and wondering what they might see and what that might sound like. So that was really the thing.
That's a great image. Yeah. Now, along sort of like the opposite idea, was a lot of times teachers really want to make sure that the piece is not just a good piece to perform, but that it's a piece that is teaching something to the students.
Hmm.
And so, we've talked a lot so far about the cultural implications of the piece and what it could teach about this First Nations culture and about the Squamish people. But from a musical standpoint, what do you see as sort of teaching opportunities here? Like you mentioned this 6/8 slash triplet kind
Yeah.
of idea, which
So
might be
it
new.
isn't
What
in
else?
six. It isn't in 6/8. It's in 4/4, but it's written with triplets. So that's definitely a teaching thing. Um, like not to compress the triplets so that they sound like a dot and eight and the 16th or something like that. Yeah, I think that's definitely a teaching tool. This piece also, everybody gets a chance in the band to play the melody at some point. So there is something in there for every, like, everyone gets a chance to shine in the group, which I make sure, especially, actually I make sure with all pieces, but especially with early grade pieces, you want to keep the kids engaged in the music. And a lot of times kids will judge a piece of music by their part, because they're not, especially at that level, they're not necessarily listening to the whole ensemble. So you want to make sure that their part is cool, that they enjoy playing it. So I think that's the other thing, is that everybody gets a chance to, at the melody, everybody gets a chance to play. I think it does go on a journey. The piece actually takes a journey. It builds to quite a big crescendo, and then so you can hear the journey of the canoe going, and then at one point they come into quite a quiet place, and it turns more pastoral, and then it builds and builds as they head towards their destination, and then you finally hear the canoe, coming to shore and stopping. So there is cinematically, um, it could be a movie. And that's another way to get kids involved, is to have them imagine what the movie might look like, and have them imagine that whole thing. Um, Different people engage with music in different ways. I personally, because I've done a lot of film and television, and I've also worked a lot with contemporary dance. Personally, I interact with music. I like visuals. I like looking at things when I'm listening to music, especially instrumental music, because instrumental music is quite abstract. We don't have words to to anchor us to the music, so we have to sort of use our imaginations. And sometimes seeing something while you're listening to the music helps you to anchor yourself to the music. So I would invite, another teaching tool is to invite the kids to, have an imagination as to what it is they might be seeing if this was a movie.
Sure. Yeah. Or draw something like you
Yeah,
said.
yeah,
That's a great
absolutely, yeah.
idea too. Yeah. Um, as you think back to your many collaborations with First Nations people, can you think of any anecdotes or maybe a moment or two that really stands out as a memorable or an enlightening kind of moment? I don't know if maybe that's a big question. If the answer is no, that's
No,
okay
I
too.
can I can definitely answer it.
Would love to
So
hear some.
there's so the local Squamish Nation here, um, in the early 1900s, there was a lot of trade between Vancouver and Hawaii. And most of the crew on the Hawaiian ships were Hawaiians. And when they got into Vancouver, because of racism, they didn't get to stay in the hotels. But the Squamish First Nation put them up. So there was a lot of, there was intermarrying and things like that going on, definitely. But there was a lot of a relationship going on between the Squamish Nation and the Polynesian people in Hawaii, or the Hawaiians. Um, so Bob Baker, who wrote some of these other people, was in Hawaii, and they were doing this sharing circle where they all sit around in a big circle with a bunch of Hawaiians, and they were sharing songs with one another. And so Bob Baker shared this song that he heard up in the Queen Charlotte Islands. So the Queen Charlotte Islands are up near Alaska. They're a long way up north. And he heard this song up there. And the story of the song is of these people a long time ago, who knows, 300, 400 years, but a long time ago, they got lost. They couldn't see the stars. They got lost. They got off track. Um, and they ended up stranded up in the Queen Charlotte Islands. They were a long way off track. And the people up there, the native people up there, took them in, fixed their canoes, fed them, gave them animals and things like that, and set them on their way. And they went back. So that's the narrative story that he learned up in the Queen Charlotte Islands. He's over in Polynesia, in Hawaii, sharing this song there, and they say, "Well, that's interesting. We've got it. We've got the same song, same melody, but it's from a different point of view. It's us getting lost and ending up a long way away from home, and these people taking us in, and feeding us and giving us animals to put in their canoes and come back again." And they know from that the Hawaiians, well, the Polynesians, it would have been back then, made it all the way up to the Queen Charlotte Islands, which is a lot further than anybody had ever thought they got. So it's pretty amazing. It is a verbal language. These melodies and these songs get passed from generation to generation. They don't get written down. Um, so I think there's probably a lot of wisdom that we don't know, that might be there, that could be very interesting in terms of how humanity, spread itself around the planet. Um, but I just thought that was a fascinating story.
That is, and I think that you sort of alluded to this earlier, but you're talking about a very different kind of culture, particularly in the fact that, you know, I can speak for myself that I spent a lot of hours of my day today and will again tomorrow on a computer, right? And then you mentioned that Chief Ian Campbell may be somewhere out in the wilderness that we're not sure where he is, and that's not a bad thing at all for him. That's a very good thing.
Yeah, yeah,
And so, in a lot of situations, if we wanted to learn more about anything, we could just Google, right, or we could just look it up online. But that story that you just shared with us doesn't sound like something that I could just Google and find out. So, like initially, how did you get connected with the Squamish people, and if there was something that we wanted to learn further, what could we do in our communities? Could we just find some First Nation folks that are nearby and just kind of ask? I mean, that seems sort of simple, but maybe is that the best way? Or
yeah.
what if
It
we wanted to
probably
enrich
is.
ourselves more with this kind of idea?
Yeah, I think that really is it. And like I said earlier, the way I found Bob Baker is through the West Vancouver Youth Band. I was introduced to him through that band, because I think one or two of his kids went through the West Van Youth Band. Um, but yes, I mean, I it was through music and through wind music that I met him. Um, and I think that's it. I really do. I was amazed at his generosity, and I don't think he gets asked that very often. It's that that we were interested in the music and interested in making it be available to the world. Um, was, like I said, he was in tears. It was extremely touching to him and very moving. So yeah, I think it starts with a conversation.
Yeah,
Either they're going to, the person's going to engage or not engage. But if it's done, with love,
yeah,
then that's where it all starts.
yeah. I think that's right. If it's coming from a place of genuine place of curiosity, I think that
Yeah.
seems like a pretty reasonable thing to start with. So that's great. Um, I want to ask you about some of your other works too, just real briefly. But before we do that, is there anything else that you'd like to say about Journey or about your other collaborations, either with Bob Baker, with Chief Ian Campbell, and any other kind of thoughts that we didn't get to talk about?
Um, the only thing is, I'm reachable. I answer emails. I respond. If I'm invited, I'll do Zoom sessions with bands. I've done them all over the world, like we're doing now. Except this isn't Zoom, but whatever. Um, you know, uh, I am available, and I love to be out there, talking to kids, talking to bands, talking about music. It's my passion. It's been my passion for as long as I can remember. So, um, I'm reachable and available. Absolutely. You can go to my website, which is bobbuckley.com. All my information is there to be able to reach me and talk to me. Plus, there's a massive amount of music there too. Not just my band music, but a lot of rock and roll stuff, movie scores, all sorts of things. There's lots of stuff. If you want to know about me, go to my website. There's lots of stuff there. But I'm happy to talk to anybody at any time. And if there are if somebody um, buys Journey and there are specific questions for me, I'll answer them. And I'll forward questions to either Bob Baker or Chief Campbell, and hopefully, hopefully they're somewhere near a computer where they can answer them. They do and they have, but it's just sometimes you wait a while.
People need to plan ahead a little bit, is what you're
Yeah.
saying, right? Well, that's really kind of you to offer that, and I'm sure that you'll have many people that'll take you up on sending an email and trying to connect about this piece and about your others too. Um, so, Journey is a part of our MusicWorks series here at Hal Leonard, and those are the songs that we usually think of more as like the concert and contest pieces, right? Rather than like the Discovery series, which is kind of more of the pop stuff. So when you think about the MusicWorks series in general, um, what are some other pieces that you have that if somebody's trying to scratch the itch for maybe something with a deeper cultural perspective or just even a more unique perspective, what are some other pieces that you maybe would recommend, even if they're not the same level? They could be any
Oh,
level.
geez. Um,
Or some of
I
your
mean,
favorites,
if you look
maybe.
behind, this is most of my
Yeah, we don't
stuff
have
behind
time
me
for
here.
all of those, I don't think.
Yeah, yeah. There's a lot of things, and they become sort of. I've done pieces that are um, sort of more pop orientated or fun pieces, especially in the earlier grade levels, because I think that that gets that helps to hook people a little bit. You mentioned Magic Mirror. That's a grade point 0.5 piece. That's sort of fun. That piece has the lines above the mirror go in one direction and below the mirror go the other direction. So it's all opposing um, lines and things like that. So that's sort of cool. Um, grade one. I'm just looking here. So Eagle Song, which is First Nations, is a grade one piece. Um, there's a recent piece of mine called Epic Journey, which is sort of sounds like a film score. So it's this sort of epic. Well, it is epic. Um, thing that just builds and builds and builds. And I don't know if you're familiar with the song. It's old now. Um, he was the drummer for Genesis.
Phil Collins.
Okay. So there was a Phil Collins piece, one of his early pieces that has this little drum machine and he's singing and it's nice and quiet. And then all of a sudden there's this huge drum fill, which everybody knows and every drummer can play, and it
Yeah.
gets big. So Epic Journey is that. It's this piece that sort of goes along and goes along, and then all of a sudden there's a gigantic drum fill and it becomes something huge and epic and quite different. So that's sort of a fun piece. And if it's done right, it'll make the audience jump out of their seats, which is sort of fun.
Always good.
Um, uh, another piece that's new, which so there's two versions of this piece. It's called Wind Machines. That's the grade one version of it. It's sort of about renewable energy. It's about windmills and all that sort of stuff. But also wind machines are instruments that you blow into. So we play on wind machines. Um, and there's things like gliders, which are wind machines. There's lots of machines that are moved by the wind. So it sort of is a reflection of things that are driven by the wind. Um, and then there's a grade a three version of the same piece that's called Wind Power. So these can be done. It was designed so that both these pieces can be played on the same concert. So if you've got a beginner band and a senior band playing on the same concert, they could each play this piece and they could play them next to each other, and one could be used as an introduction to the next piece. They're not the same. They share some material, but they work together as a continuous piece. So if you have a junior band and a senior band that are going to share the same stage, it's a cool thing to do because they can
Yeah.
actually be on the stage and play the same piece together. So another one. This is a grade three piece. I wrote a symphony, a wind symphony, which is like grade six. It's a hard piece, but I was really taken by the melodies. So the symphony is based on French Canadian folk tunes, not far from where you live. Um, and most of these folk tunes actually came over originally from France, and they're really catchy tunes. It's the first time I've tried taking somebody else's melody, other than the native pieces. It's the first time I've taken somebody else's melody and work with them and mess with them and do things with them. So I did a grade three version of that called Quebec Folk Rhapsody. That's sort of fun. Because it's a type of folk music that they probably are not familiar with. It sort of sounds a little bit Celtic. It sort of sounds a little bit French. but it's neither one of them. And it's they're quite neat melodies. The other piece that's been really popular, which is a grade two piece, and it's also available for FlexBand, is called Shakespeare Meets Godzilla. So it's a mashup of Elizabethan music and gothic horror music, sort of stuck together in the same piece. And there is a narrative that goes with it. You can have somebody narrate it
Mm,
and play it, or you can just play the piece. It's sort of cool. It's been very, very popular. It's been a good seller. Um, so if you want something that's a little different and something that is not just an audience pleaser, but kids really enjoy playing it, and it's a good teaching tool because I don't know how much Elizabethan music is available to us,
right.
but the Elizabethan part of it is quite authentic,
Yeah.
um, and the horror part of it is really authentic. I mean, it uses all sorts of clusters and all sorts of things like that. So, it's for a grade three piece. It's quite. And actually, no, it's a grade two piece. It's quite
Perfect.
cool. Grade three. Um, there's a piece that I mentioned to you, Cathedral Grove. Which is Cathedral Grove is a first growth forest around here, and these trees are 2, 3, 400 years old. Um, the cathedral part of it is the trees, and that's sort of a neat piece. Um, and then it just goes on and on. Of the newer pieces, Echoes of the Silent is if you're looking for something that's reflective and something that's sort of hymn-like. Um, it's a nice change of pace. It's very melodic and very tuneful, but it's also very reflective in its nature.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, um,
Well, that's great. Yeah, that's an excellent overview. And like you said, if people want to find more of your music, either on halleonard.com or on
yeah,
your own personal website, and we'll make sure to include some links that people can get to visit those websites to find out more. That's really fantastic. I think all these things that you're doing are quite unique, and I think that there's a real need for connecting music of other cultures with the culture of wind band, right? Which seems to be kind of its own culture in many ways, right? So,
yeah,
will you be at Midwest this year?
yeah, absolutely, yeah,
Great. So people can come and find you, and I think a lot of other Hal Leonard composers will be there too. So definitely stop by the Hal Leonard booth at Midwest if you're there, and say hello, and you can maybe meet Bob and some of the other folks that you're playing their music in your band rooms.
yeah.
Always a fun experience.
And if you come to Midwest, and if I can, there's usually time in there. If you want to go have a coffee and hang out, I'm always good for that too.
That sounds great. Well, again, I'm sure a lot of people will take you up on that. I think that can draw our session to a close unless there's any other things that you want to add. But I just want to say on behalf of Hal Leonard and on behalf of all of the music education community in the U.S. and beyond, really thank you for all of your contributions. And thank you so much for your time this evening to just give us a little bit of insight into what's a really special piece that I hope a lot more folks will be adding to their repertoire either for the spring or next year or sometime in the near future. So we really appreciate you and want to thank you for all your work, and also a big thanks to the Squamish people and to Chief Ian Campbell and to Bob Baker and everybody who has had a hand in making this music more accessible. So
Yeah.
thank you so much, and
Yes.
we will hopefully see you at Midwest or sometime beyond that. All right.
Yes. Thank you, and thank you for this. I mean, I will add that composing is a very solitary thing. We tend to us composers tend to spend a lot of time alone. So it's a joy for us to be able to be contacted by people and actually know that our
Yeah.
music's being performed and enjoyed. Otherwise, we just live in a vacuum. So thank you, and anybody that's in Midwest, I'd love to meet you.
Great. Well, I think that's a great place to close. So, really appreciate you, and hope that you have a great rest of your week. And maybe we'll see you in Chicago. All right.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron.
All right. Thank you. Have a great night.